The horseshoes clanged against the rocky mountain trail as Eleanor pressed her mare forward, her ribs screaming with every jolting movement, knowing that if the posse caught her, they would drag her back to the man whose respectability was his greatest weapon. The summer of 1878 had scorched the Colorado Territory with relentless heat, but up here in the high country, the air turned crisp as evening approached. Eleanor Hutchins guided her stolen mare along a narrow path that hugged the mountainside, her hands trembling on the reins despite her determination to stay steady. Behind her, perhaps 5 miles back now, she could hear the distant echoes of men calling to one another. The posse, the men from Silver Ridge who believed they were doing God's work by hunting down a wayward wife. Her husband, Thomas Hutchins, would be with them. He always made sure to be seen doing the right thing, the honorable thing. In Silver Ridge, he was known as a good man, an honest businessman who ran the general store with fairness and integrity. When they married 2 years ago, when Eleanor was 18 and foolish enough to believe that a respectable man meant a kind man, the whole town had celebrated. The preacher had called it a blessed union. The women had told her how fortunate she was. None of them saw what happened behind closed doors. Eleanor's left eye was still swollen half shut from 3 nights ago when she had burned the evening stew. The bruises on her ribs were older, from last week when she had smiled too warmly at a customer, and the marks on her wrists, hidden beneath her long sleeves even in summer heat, those were constant reminders of how Thomas liked to pin her down when he wanted to remind her of her place. The mare stumbled slightly, and Eleanor bit back a cry as pain lanced through her middle. She had bound her ribs as best she could before fleeing, but the makeshift wrapping did little to ease the agony. Still, she pressed on. Death in these mountains seemed preferable to another day in Thomas Hutchins' house. The sun was sinking lower now, painting the peaks in shades of orange and gold. Eleanor knew she needed to find shelter before full darkness fell. She had grabbed what little she could before fleeing: a canteen, some dried beef, a wool blanket, and the small derringer that had belonged to her father. It was not much to survive on, but then again, she had not exactly planned this escape. She had simply waited until Thomas left for a town council meeting, climbed on the gentlest mare in his small stable, and ridden away from Silver Ridge as if the devil himself pursued her. Perhaps he did, in a manner of speaking. The trail began to level out, opening into a small meadow surrounded by towering pines. A stream cut through the grass, its water crystal clear and cold from mountain snowmelt. Eleanor dismounted carefully, moving like an old woman despite her 20 years. The mare immediately went to the water to drink, and Eleanor knelt beside her, cupping the icy liquid in her hands and bringing it to her face. It stung against her bruised eye, but the pain was clean, honest, not like the pain Thomas inflicted. She was refilling her canteen when she heard it, the definite sound of horses approaching from the direction she had come. Multiple horses. The posse had gained ground faster than she had hoped. Eleanor's heart hammered against her injured ribs. She looked around desperately for somewhere to hide, but the meadow offered little cover. The trees at the far edge might conceal her, but not the mare, and without the horse, she would never survive in this wilderness. Her mind raced through impossible options as the voices grew louder. She came this way. I am certain of it. That was Virgil Hayes, Thomas's closest friend and the deputy sheriff. Those tracks are fresh, no more than 20 minutes old. I still cannot believe Eleanor would do this, another voice said, Caleb Morrison, who owned the hardware store. Thomas has been nothing but good to her, gave her a fine house, respectability, everything a woman could want. Women are prone to hysteria. Thomas's voice cut through the evening air, smooth and reasonable as always. The doctor in Denver told me she might have spells. I should have watched her more carefully. When we find her, she will need proper medical attention, perhaps a stay at that sanatorium in Colorado Springs. Eleanor felt ice water in her veins. A sanatorium. He would lock her away, declare her insane, and no one would question the word of honest Thomas Hutchins. She would disappear into an asylum and never emerge, just another hysterical woman who could not appreciate her good fortune. The posse entered the meadow just as Eleanor finished filling her canteen. She froze, half hidden behind her mare, but it was futile. 6 men on horseback, and there she was, completely exposed in the fading light. There, Virgil shouted, spurring his horse forward. Eleanor, stay where you are. Something in Eleanor broke then, some final thread of compliance and fear that had kept her docile for 2 years. She grabbed her mare's saddle horn and hauled herself up despite the screaming pain in her ribs. The mare, sensing her panic, danced sideways as Eleanor struggled into the saddle. "Eleanor, stop this foolishness at once," Thomas called out, his voice carrying that edge she knew all too well, the edge that meant punishment later. "You are unwell, darling. Let us take you home where you will be safe." She did not waste breath on words. Instead, she kicked the mare into motion, heading for the tree line on the opposite side of the meadow. Behind her, the men shouted and gave chase. A gunshot cracked through the air, and Eleanor flinched, but she realized it was fired upward, a warning shot. They wanted her alive. Thomas wanted her alive so he could continue his torment in private while the world saw only his patient devotion to his troubled wife. The trees swallowed her, branches whipping at her face and arms as the mare plunged into the forest. Eleanor leaned low over the animal's neck, trusting the horse's instincts in the dimming light. Behind her, she could hear the posse crashing through the undergrowth, but the thick forest was slowing them down. The terrain grew steeper, more treacherous. The mare's breathing came in great heaving gasps, foam flecking her neck. Eleanor knew she was pushing the animal too hard, but stopping meant capture, and capture meant a fate worse than death. The forest opened suddenly onto a rocky slope, and the mare scrambled upward, hooves sliding on loose stones. At the top, Eleanor risked a glance back and saw the posse perhaps 100 yards behind, their horses struggling with the same treacherous footing. That was when the mare's hoof caught between 2 rocks. The animal went down with a scream that echoed off the mountainside. Eleanor was thrown clear, hitting the ground hard enough to drive all air from her lungs. She lay gasping like a landed fish, stars exploding across her vision, pain so intense she thought she might vomit. The mare thrashed nearby, trying to stand, but one foreleg hung at an awful angle. Broken. Through the haze of pain, Eleanor heard the posse getting closer. She had perhaps 2 minutes before they reached her. The mare's agonized whinnying would draw them straight to this spot. Eleanor forced herself to move, crawling first, then stumbling to her feet. Her own left leg buckled under her weight, and she realized her ankle was badly twisted, possibly broken itself. She could barely walk, let alone run. The mountainside here was a confusion of boulders and scraggly pines clinging to thin soil. As darkness settled in earnest, Eleanor limped desperately forward, seeking any kind of shelter. Her vision swam, and she was not sure if it was from the fall, her injuries, or simple exhaustion. She had not eaten properly in days, Thomas having locked away food after she displeased him. A massive boulder loomed before her, perhaps 15 feet high. At its base, half hidden by scrub brush, was a dark opening, a cave or crevice of some kind. Eleanor did not hesitate. She pushed through the brush, biting her lip against a cry as branches scraped across her bruised face. The opening was narrow, barely wide enough for her slim frame, but she squeezed through into darkness that smelled of stone and earth and something else, something animal. She had just pulled herself fully inside when she heard the posse arrive at the spot where the mare had fallen. Another gunshot, and the mare's screaming stopped abruptly. They had put the poor creature out of its misery. Eleanor felt tears sting her eyes, but she did not let them fall. She could not afford to make a sound. "She cannot be far," Virgil's voice breathing hard from the chase. She went over hard, probably injured. "Spread out," Thomas commanded, his tone sharp now that Eleanor was not present to hear him. "Check every shadow, every crevice." She could not have gotten far on foot. Footsteps crunched on the rocky ground outside Eleanor's hiding place. She pressed herself against the back of the small cave, which extended perhaps 8 feet into the boulder. Her hands touched the rough stone wall, and she realized it was not natural rock but built up in places, stacked deliberately. Someone had modified this cave, made it into a shelter. That should have comforted her, but instead, it raised a new fear. What if whoever lived here returned while she hid? A man's legs appeared in her narrow field of vision, just outside the cave opening. Boots, leather, worn but well-maintained. She held her breath so completely that her chest began to burn. The man stood there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. Then he moved on, calling out that he saw no sign. "It will be full dark soon," Caleb Morrison said from somewhere nearby. "We cannot search in this blackness. Someone will break their neck." "We cannot leave her out here," Thomas protested. But Eleanor heard the calculation in his voice. He was weighing his options, his reputation as a devoted husband searching for his lost wife, against the practical difficulty of a nighttime mountain search. "Thomas, be reasonable," Virgil said. "If she is injured as badly as that fall suggested, she is not going anywhere. We will make camp and resume at first light. We will find her then." There was a long pause. Eleanor could almost feel Thomas's frustration radiating through the darkness. Finally, he spoke. "Very well, but we start again at dawn. She is my wife, and I will not abandon her to the dangers of this wilderness." The men moved away, their voices fading as they retreated to make camp. Eleanor waited until she could no longer hear anything but the wind in the pines before she allowed herself to breathe normally. Her entire body trembled with delayed reaction. She had escaped for now, but she was trapped. At dawn, they would search again, and in daylight, they would surely find this cave. She needed to move to find a better hiding place, but her body refused to cooperate. The adrenaline that had carried her this far was draining away, leaving only pain and exhaustion. Her ankle throbbed, her ribs felt like broken glass, and her head swam with dizziness. She fumbled for her canteen and took a small sip, rationing the water. Then she pulled the wool blanket from where she had strapped it to her back and wrapped it around her shoulders. The temperature was dropping rapidly as full night descended on the mountain. Eleanor had not considered the cold when she fled. She had been focused only on escape. Now, huddled in this stone shelter, she began to understand just how unprepared she was for survival in this wilderness. She might have fled one death only to find another, slower one in these mountains. As if summoned by her dark thoughts, she heard something moving outside the cave. Not the sounds of the posse returning, but something else, something large, moving with careful deliberation through the darkness. Eleanor's hand went to the derringer tucked in her waistband, though she knew the tiny gun would do little against a bear or mountain lion. The footsteps stopped outside the cave entrance. A man's voice, deep and rough, spoke quietly. "I know you were in there. I saw your tracks. You are hurt." Eleanor's heart seized. This was not Thomas or any of the posse. This was someone else, someone who spoke with an accent she could not quite place, a slight roughness that suggested English was not his first language. She remained silent, hoping he would leave. "The men looking for you," the voice continued. "They made camp a half-mile down the mountain. They say you are a runaway wife. They say you are sick in the head." A pause. "But they are poor liars. I have seen men hunting escaped slaves with more honesty in their faces." Despite herself, Eleanor spoke. "Go away." "This is my shelter," the man said, but not unkindly. "I built this place 3 years ago as a way station. I use it when I am hunting in this area. I do not mind you being here, but I cannot leave you here either. You need help." "I do not need anything from you or any man," Eleanor said, trying to put steel in her voice despite the way it shook. There was a sound outside that might have been a low chuckle. "Stubborn, that's good. Stubborn keeps people alive in mountains, but stubborn and stupid are different things. You are hurt bad. I can hear it in how you breathe. Broken ribs, yes?" Eleanor said nothing. "I am going to build a fire," the man said. "Small one, sheltered so your hunters cannot see. You can stay in there if you want, but the night is cold and you are already shaking. I can hear your teeth." She had not realized she was shaking so violently, but now that he mentioned it, she could not stop. The cold was seeping into her bones, and her wet clothes from fording the stream earlier were not helping. She heard the man moving around outside, the sound of flint striking steel, the crackle of kindling catching fire. Orange light began to flicker against the cave walls. Minutes passed. The smell of wood smoke drifted in, and with it, the scent of something cooking. Eleanor's stomach clenched with hunger. When had she last eaten? Yesterday morning, a piece of hard bread she had managed to steal from Thomas's locked pantry. "I have rabbit," the man said conversationally. "Caught it this morning. More than enough for 2. You can eat or not, your choice. But I will tell you, trying to heal on an empty belly is like trying to climb mountain in winter with no coat. Possible, maybe, but very stupid." Despite everything, despite her fear and pain and exhaustion, Eleanor found herself edging toward the cave mouth. The warmth of the fire called to her, and the smell of cooking meat made her dizzy with hunger. She crawled forward until she could see out. The man sat with his back to a tree about 10 feet from the cave entrance, tending a small fire built in a depression and surrounded by stones to contain the light. He was enormous, broad-shouldered and thick-armed, with dark hair that fell past his shoulders. His face was weathered and tanned, with a thick beard, and his clothing was a mix of buckskin and wool, practical and worn. A large rifle rested against the tree beside him, along with a pack that had seen many miles of use. He looked up at her, and Eleanor saw his eyes widen slightly as the firelight illuminated her face. His expression, which had been neutral, hardened into something else. Not anger exactly, but a cold fury that made her instinctively pull back. "Ah," he said softly, "now I understand why you run." Eleanor touched her face self-consciously, forgetting about the swollen eye, the bruises that mottled her cheekbone and jaw. "It is not what you think," she said automatically, the lie coming easily after 2 years of practice. "It is exactly what I think," the man said. He turned back to the fire, using a knife to check the rabbit roasting on a spit. "I have seen those marks before. My mother, she had them. My father, he was very good at making sure they did not show when she was in town. But I saw. My sisters saw. We lived with it until I was big enough to stop him." He glanced at her again. "I was 14 when I kill him. They call it murder, so I come west. That was 18 years ago." The casual way he spoke of killing his father should have frightened Eleanor, but instead, she felt a strange kinship. Here was someone who understood, someone who had lived with the same secret violence she had known. "The posse," she said hesitantly. "They will search at dawn." "Yes," the man agreed. "They will find this place probably. It is not so hidden in daylight. So we leave before dawn. I know paths they do not know. I can get you away from here, take you to safety." He pulled the rabbit from the fire and began carving meat onto a flat piece of bark that served as a plate. "But first you eat. Then I look at your injuries. Then we rest a few hours before we move. Yes?" Eleanor knew she should be cautious. She did not know this man, did not know if she could trust him. But she was hurt and cold and hunted, and he was offering help without asking for anything in return. More importantly, he had seen the bruises and believed her immediately. That was something not even the women of Silver Ridge had done. She pulled herself out of the cave, biting back a whimper as her ankle protested. The man watched but did not offer help, seeming to understand that she needed to do this herself. She settled on the opposite side of the fire from him, accepting the bark plate of rabbit with shaking hands. The meat was slightly charred on the outside, tender within, and it was the most delicious thing Eleanor had ever tasted. She tried to eat slowly, to maintain some semblance of dignity, but hunger won out. She devoured every bite, then accepted a second helping that the man offered without comment. While she ate, he watched the darkness around them with the alertness of someone long accustomed to living in wild places. His hand never strayed far from the rifle. After she finished eating, he poured water from his own canteen into a tin cup and handed it to her. "I am called Mikael," he said. "Mikael Petersen. I come from Norway, very far north. I trap and hunt in these mountains. I sell furs in Denver twice a year. Otherwise, I stay away from people." He paused. "What are you called?" "Eleanor," she said softly. "Eleanor Hutchins." She hesitated, then added, "Though I would like to go back to my maiden name. Eleanor Brennan." Mikael nodded, as if this made perfect sense. "Eleanor Brennan, then. Now, I need to look at your injuries. I know some medicine, enough to keep myself alive all these years. You will let me?" Eleanor tensed, old instincts screaming at her not to let a man close, but she forced herself to nod. Mikael moved around the fire with surprising grace for such a large man. He knelt beside her, keeping his movements slow and visible, and began a careful examination. His hands were gentle despite their size, probing her ankle with a touch that still made her wince. "Not broken," he said after a moment. "Bad sprain, though. I will wrap it." He moved upward, and when his fingers lightly touched her ribs through her blouse, she could not help the sharp intake of breath. His jaw tightened. 2, maybe 3 cracked. "You rode for hours with this?" "I had no choice," Eleanor said. "No," Mikael agreed quietly. "You did not." He sat back on his heels, studying her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. "You are very brave, Eleanor Brennan. Stupid, maybe, to run into mountains alone with no supplies or knowledge, but very brave. "I could not stay," she whispered. "He was going to lock me away, call me insane." "Men like that, they always find a way to keep control," Mikael said. He retrieved his pack and began pulling out supplies: strips of cloth, a small jar of something that smelled like pine and herbs, a leather flask. They cannot stand to lose their power over someone weaker. It makes them feel small, so they make sure the woman feels smaller. He met her eyes. "But you are not weak. Weak women do not run. They do not risk everything for freedom." Tears stung Eleanor's eyes, and she blinked them back fiercely. She had not cried since the early months of her marriage, when she still believed tears might soften Thomas's heart. She had learned better. Mikael said nothing about her tears. He simply proceeded to treat her injuries with the same gentle efficiency. He wrapped her ankle snugly, used the herb salve on her visible bruises, and showed her how to rewrap her ribs more securely. When he was done, he offered her the leather flask. "Whiskey," he said, "for pain and for warmth. Drink." The whiskey burned going down, but the warmth that spread through her chest afterward was worth it. Eleanor took 2 long swallows before handing it back. Mikael took a drink himself, then corked the flask and stowed it away. "We have perhaps 4 hours before we must leave," he said. "You should sleep. I will keep watch." "What about you?" Eleanor asked. "Do you not need rest?" "I am used to going without," Mikael said simply. "Sleep, Eleanor Brennan. You will need strength for tomorrow." Eleanor wanted to argue, but exhaustion was a weight dragging her down. She pulled her blanket tighter around herself and leaned back against the boulder. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Mikael sitting like a guardian sentinel, his rifle across his knees, his eyes scanning the darkness for threats. She woke to his hand on her shoulder, gentle but firm. "Time to go," he said quietly. "Dawn is coming." Eleanor sat up, stifling a groan as every muscle in her body protested. The fire was gone, covered completely so not even a wisp of smoke remained. Mikael had already packed his gear and was offering her a piece of dried venison for breakfast. She accepted it gratefully, chewing the tough meat as she struggled to her feet. Her ankle hurt less after the night's rest, though it still protested her weight. "Can you walk?" Mikael asked, watching her carefully. "I can walk," Eleanor said firmly, though in truth she was not entirely certain. Mikael studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Good. We go north and west, higher into mountains. There is a valley very remote where I have a cabin. No one knows of it except me. You will be safe there." "I cannot ask you to do this," Eleanor said. "Those men, the Posse, if they think you helped me, they could accuse you of kidnapping, or worse." "Let them accuse," Mikael said with a shrug. "I do not care what such men think. Besides, they will not find us. I know these mountains like I know my own hands. They are city men playing at tracking. They will give up in a day or two when they realize how big this wilderness is." He led her away from the shelter, just as the eastern sky was beginning to pale. They moved through the forest in single file, Mikael setting a pace that was swift but manageable. Eleanor gritted her teeth against the pain and kept going. She had not come this far to give up now. Behind them, perhaps a mile back, she heard the distant sounds of the Posse stirring. Men's voices, the whinny of horses. They would find the shelter soon and know she had been there. But by then, Eleanor and Mikael would be gone, following a trail only he knew. The terrain grew steeper and more rugged. At times, Mikael had to help Eleanor over particularly difficult obstacles, his hand firm on her arm or back, steadying but never grabbing, never confining. She noticed he always released her the moment she was steady, always kept a respectful distance. After 2 years of Thomas's possessive grabbing, his refusal to let her move without his permission, Mikael's careful respect was like water in a desert. They climbed higher as the sun rose, staying under the cover of trees whenever possible. Once, they heard voices in the distance, and Mikael immediately led Eleanor off the path and behind a massive fallen log. They crouched there silently as 2 men from the Posse rode past, perhaps 50 yards away, calling Eleanor's name. "She could not have gotten far, not with those injuries," one man said. "Maybe a bear got her." "Thomas will want proof," the other replied. "We should search the area more thoroughly." The voices faded. Mikael waited several more minutes before indicating it was safe to move. They continued on, always climbing, always moving deeper into the wilderness. By midday, Eleanor's strength was flagging. Her ankle was swelling despite the wrapping, and her ribs sent sharp pains through her chest with every breath. She stumbled over a root and nearly fell, catching herself against a tree. Mikael was beside her immediately. "How far?" she asked, hating the weakness in her voice. "2 more miles," Mikael said. "Can you make it?" Eleanor wanted to say yes to prove she was strong enough, but honesty forced her to say, "I do not know." Mikael considered this. Then, without asking permission, he simply scooped her up in his arms. Eleanor gasped, instinctively struggling, panic flooding through her. "Easy," Mikael said, his voice calm and steady. "I will not hurt you. I'm only carrying you to save time and strength, nothing more. Yes?" Eleanor forced herself to breathe, to push past the panic. Mikael's arms, while strong, were not confining. He held her securely but not tightly. She could feel the power in his body, the hard muscle that came from years of hard living, but he wielded that power with gentleness. Slowly, she nodded. Mikael carried her as easily as if she weighed nothing, maintaining a steady pace through the difficult terrain. After a while, Eleanor allowed herself to relax slightly against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, strong and steady, feel the warmth of his body chasing away the chill that had settled in her bones. "Why are you helping me?" she asked quietly. Mikael was silent for several steps. Then, "I told you about my father. What I did not tell you is that I was not brave enough to stop him sooner. My mother, she died when I was 13. He beat her one time too many, and something inside her broke. She just stopped fighting, stopped eating. She faded away." His arms tightened slightly around Eleanor, then deliberately loosened. "I swore I would never let that happen to anyone else if I could stop it. So when I see you, with those marks, running from men who call your husband good and honest, I know what I must do." Eleanor felt tears slip down her cheeks, but this time she did not try to stop them. "I am sorry about your mother." "And I am sorry about what you suffer," Mikael replied. "But you are free now. I make sure of it." They traveled in silence after that, Eleanor drifting in and out of awareness, lulled by the rhythm of Mikael's steps and the warmth of his body. She woke fully when he stopped walking and set her gently on her feet. "We are here," he said. Eleanor looked around and caught her breath. They stood in a high mountain valley, a bowl of green meadow surrounded by towering peaks. A stream ran through the center, and at the far end, backed up against the tree line, stood a cabin. It was small but well built, with a stone chimney and a covered porch. Around it were various structures, a shed for wood, a smokehouse, what looked like a small stable. This was not a temporary camp. This was a home. "You built all this?" Eleanor asked. Mikael nodded. "Over 3 years. I come here in spring and summer to hunt and trap. In winter I go lower, to a cave system where it is warmer. But this is my true home." He glanced at her. "You are welcome to stay as long as you need. There is food, shelter, safety. No one will find you here." Eleanor stared at the cabin, at this sanctuary in the wilderness, and felt something unknot in her chest. For the first time since she had married Thomas Hutchins, she felt truly safe. Mikael led her to the cabin and opened the door. The interior was simple but comfortable. A large room with a stone fireplace, a table with 2 chairs, a bed frame with a thick mattress stuffed with pine needles and covered with furs, shelves filled with supplies and various tools and traps hanging from the walls. Everything was clean and well organized, the home of a man who valued order. "You take the bed," Mikael said. "I will sleep outside, more proper that way." "This is your home," Eleanor protested. "I cannot take your bed." "You are injured and exhausted," Mikael said firmly. "You need real rest. I am fine with bedroll under stars. I prefer it, actually." He moved to the fireplace and began building a fire. "Rest now. When you wake, I will make food." Eleanor wanted to argue further, but her body had reached its limit. She sank onto the bed, and the softness of the furs after days of hard ground was almost overwhelming. She was asleep before Mikael even got the fire lit. She slept for nearly 20 hours, waking occasionally to find Mikael there with water or broth, helping her drink before she sank back into healing sleep. When she finally woke fully, it was late afternoon of the following day. Sunlight streamed through the cabin's single window, illuminating dust motes in the air. Eleanor sat up slowly, surprised to find that while she still hurt, the pain had diminished significantly. Her ribs were tightly wrapped in fresh bandages, Her ankle was properly splinted, and she was wearing a clean shirt several sizes too large. She had vague memories of Mikael helping her change out of her torn, dirty blouse, his movements clinical and respectful, his eyes averted. The cabin door was open, and she could see Mikael outside, splitting wood. He had removed his shirt in the afternoon heat, and Eleanor could not help but notice the powerful muscles of his back and shoulders, the way they moved beneath sun-darkened skin. He swung the axe with easy precision, each stroke splitting wood cleanly. There was something mesmerizing about watching him work, about seeing strength used for creation rather than destruction. As if sensing her gaze, Mikael turned. When he saw her sitting up, he smiled, and Eleanor was struck by how the expression transformed his face. Without the serious intensity, he looked younger, more approachable. "You are awake," he said, setting down the axe and reaching for his shirt. "Good. You had me worried. You talked in your sleep. Bad dreams." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. "What did I say?" "Nothing clear," Mikael assured her. "Just fear sounds. You cried out a few times, but I wake you, give you water, and you settle again." He pulled on his shirt and came to the cabin door. "How do you feel?" "Better," Eleanor admitted. "Much better. Thank you for caring for me." Mikael shrugged as if it were nothing. "I make stew, deer and vegetables from my garden. You are hungry, yes?" At the mention of food, Eleanor's stomach growled loudly enough for both of them to hear. Mikael chuckled. "I take that as yes. Come, you should sit outside. The air's good. We'll help you heal." He helped her outside to a rough-hewn bench on the porch. Eleanor sat gratefully, breathing in the clean mountain air. The valley was beautiful in the golden afternoon light, peaceful in a way she had never experienced. In Silver Ridge, there had always been noise, always someone watching, always the tension of maintaining appearances. Here, there was only wind and birdsong and the distant rush of the stream. Mikael brought her a bowl of stew and a piece of bread he had baked that morning. The stew was rich and savory, the bread still slightly warm. Eleanor ate slowly, savoring each bite. Mikael sat beside her with his own bowl. They ate in comfortable silence. "The posse," Eleanor finally asked, "do you think they will continue searching?" "I went out this morning early to scout," Mikael said. "They have given up. They spent another day searching, but the mountains scare them. Last night they go back to Silver Ridge. Your husband, he tell everyone you must be dead, killed by animals or falling or exposure. He play the grieving widower very well, I think." Eleanor should have felt relief, but instead she felt a strange numbness. "So I am dead now. Eleanor Hutchins is dead." "Yes," Mikael said gently. "But Eleanor Brennan is alive, free. You can be whoever you want to be now." "And who is that?" Eleanor asked, hearing the bitterness in her own voice. "A woman with no money, no skills, no family. A woman who cannot show her face in town because someone might recognize her and send word back to Silver Ridge. A woman who was strong enough to escape," Mikael said firmly. "A woman who survived. As for the rest, we figure it out. You can stay here as long as you want, a month, a year, forever if you wish. You are safe. That is what matters." Eleanor looked at him, at this mountain man who had saved her without asking anything in return. "Why would you let me stay forever? You do not even know me." Mikael met her gaze steadily. "I know enough. I know you are brave. I know you are strong. I know you deserve better than what you had." He paused. "And I know what it is like to be alone. If you stay, I have company. If you go, I help you go safely. Either way, it is your choice. I do not control you." The emphasis on those last words, the promise implicit in them, made Eleanor's throat tight. She nodded, not trusting her voice. They finished eating, and Mikael took the bowls to wash in the stream. Eleanor watched him go, noting the easy confidence in his movements, the way he seemed completely at home in this wild place. She tried to imagine Thomas here and almost laughed at the absurdity. Thomas, who complained if his dinner was not precisely on time, who required perfectly pressed shirts and polished boots, who viewed nature as something to be conquered and tamed. He would be helpless in this wilderness. But Mikael thrived here. This was his kingdom, and he ruled it not through force, but through skill and knowledge and respect for the land. Over the following days, Eleanor's strength returned. Mikael was a patient caretaker, bringing her meals, changing her bandages, helping her take short walks to rebuild her stamina. He talked to her about the mountains, teaching her the names of plants and animals, showing her which berries were safe to eat and which would make her sick. He told her stories of Norway, of fjords and midnight sun, of why he had come to America with his family when he was 8 years old, seeking a better life. "My father, he was different in Norway," Mikael said one evening as they sat watching the sunset paint the peaks in shades of rose and gold. "Or maybe he was always bad, and I was too young to see. Here, in new country, he struggle. He cannot find good work, cannot make money like he promised my mother. He blame her for everything. Say she trap him with children, ruin his chances. The anger grows until it become violence." "How did your sisters fare?" Eleanor asked. "After your father died and you left?" "They are older than me," Mikael said. "Already married. I make sure they go to good men, men who I watch carefully first. They live in Minnesota now, have children. I get letter once a year, send them money from my fur sales. They forgive me for what I do. They understand." "Do you ever wish you could see them?" Mikael was quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes. But I'm wanted man in Minnesota. I cannot go back. And I find I like the mountains, like the solitude. People are complicated, full of lies and cruelty. Mountains are honest. If you respect them, they provide. If you are careless, they kill you. Simple." Eleanor understood that sentiment. After 2 years of navigating Thomas's unpredictable moods, of trying to guess what would please him and what would earn her a beating, the straightforward honesty of the wilderness was refreshing. As the days passed, Eleanor found herself settling into the rhythm of life in the mountain valley. Her injuries healed, and she began to help Mikael with daily tasks. She learned to tend his small garden, to preserve meat in the smokehouse, to tan hides properly. Mikael taught her to fish in the stream, to set rabbit snares, to read weather signs in the clouds. He gave her one of his knives and showed her how to use it for everything from cutting rope to defending herself. "You should never be helpless again," he said seriously, as he taught her basic fighting techniques. "I hope you never need this, but if you do, you know it now." Eleanor practiced the movements until they became automatic. Where to strike to disable an attacker, how to use an opponent's weight against them, how to break a wrist grip. Mikael was a patient teacher, never touching her more than necessary, always asking permission before demonstrating a hold or grip. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after her arrival, Eleanor was working in the garden when she heard horses approaching. Terror seized her immediately, and she looked toward Mikael, who was repairing the stable door. He had heard it too and was already reaching for his rifle. "Inside," he said quietly. "Hide in the cellar. Do not come out until I say." Eleanor's first instinct was to obey, to hide like she had hidden from Thomas's rages, but then something in her rebelled. She was tired of being afraid, tired of hiding. She had a knife now, and Mikael had taught her how to use it. If danger was coming, she would face it standing. "No," she said, pulling the knife from her belt. "I stay with you." Mikael looked at her, and something like pride flickered in his eyes. He nodded. "Then stay behind me. If shooting starts, you drop and crawl to cover, understand?" Eleanor nodded, positioning herself behind Mikael's broad back as 3 riders emerged from the tree line. As they came closer, Eleanor felt her heart begin to slow from its panicked gallop. These were not men from Silver Ridge. These were mountain men like Mikael, dressed in buckskin and fur, heavily armed but with an easy, casual bearing. Mikael lowered his rifle slightly, though he did not relax completely. "Henry," he called out, "it has been long time." The lead rider, a grizzled man with a gray beard and laugh lines around his eyes, grinned. "Mikael, you old hermit, figured I would find you holed up here. Got some furs to trade if you are interested." His eyes found Eleanor and his eyebrows rose. "Well now, this is a surprise. Did not know you had yourself a woman." "This is Eleanor," Mikael said, his tone making it clear that was all the explanation anyone needed. "Eleanor, this is Henry Blackwood. We trade sometimes. These are his partners, Jim and Manuel." The other 2 men nodded politely. Eleanor noticed they were all careful to keep their distance, their weapons pointed away, their body language non-threatening. These were men who understood mountain courtesy. "We heard tell of a woman gone missing from Silver Ridge," Henry said conversationally. "Posse searched for a few days, then gave up. Husband said she must have died in the wilderness. Real shame, they said. Pretty young thing, married to an upstanding man. They painted her as half mad with female hysteria. Mikael said nothing, his face impassive. Henry grinned. Course, I heard different from a Ute woman I know. She said she saw a big Norwegian man carrying a hurt woman through the high country, gentle as can be. Said she followed for a while to make sure the woman wanted to be carried, that it was not an abduction. She said the woman was hurt bad, but that she leaned into the man, trusted him. So the Ute woman let them be. Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. She had not realized they had been watched. The Ute woman, Mikael said carefully. She tell anyone else? Nope, Henry said cheerfully. She does not care much for white men's laws anyway. Figures if a woman runs, she has good reason. But I thought you should know. Stories are being told. Might be smart for your friend here to change her appearance some if she plans to ever go near civilization. I have no plans to go anywhere, Eleanor said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. Henry studied her for a moment, then nodded approvingly. Mountain life is hard for women used to town comforts, but I reckon you might be tough enough for it. He turned back to Mikael. Now, about those furs. I got sugar, coffee, salt, flour. Some other supplies I think you might need. Want to trade? The men dismounted, and Mikael invited them to stay for dinner. Eleanor helped him prepare food while the men conducted their trading outside, and when they all sat down to eat, the conversation flowed easily. Henry and his partners had been in the mountains for over 20 years, and they had stories that made even Mikael laugh. As the evening wore on and whiskey was passed around, Henry grew more serious. Mikael, you should know something. That husband of hers, Hutchins, he is not letting this go quiet-like. He held a funeral, made a big show of grief, but he is asking questions, offering money to anyone who brings him information about what really happened to his wife. He is claiming he wants closure, wants to know for certain she is dead so he can properly mourn. He wants to make sure I am actually gone, Eleanor said bitterly. He cannot stand the thought that I escaped him. That is the way of it with controlling men, Henry agreed. They would rather see a woman dead than free. You watch yourself, girl. And Mikael, you watch yourself too. Man like that, he will not stop searching, no matter what he says in public. After the traders left the next morning, Eleanor found herself thinking about Henry's warning. She had been so focused on her own freedom that she had not fully considered the danger she might be bringing to Mikael. That evening, as they prepared dinner together, she broached the subject. Maybe I should leave, she said quietly. Go somewhere far away where Thomas will never find me. I do not want to put you in danger. Mikael, who was cutting vegetables, set down his knife and turned to face her. You want to leave? No, Eleanor admitted, but I do not want you to suffer because of me. Let me worry about that, Mikael said. He stepped closer, and Eleanor found herself looking up at him, noticing for the first time the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. Eleanor, I do not do this because I have to. I do this because I want to. Having you here, it is good. The cabin feels warmer with two people. The work is lighter when shared. And I like talking to you, like teaching you mountain ways. You make me remember there are good things about people, not just cruelty. Eleanor felt her breath catch. There was something in the way Mikael was looking at her, something warm and intent that made her heart beat faster. I like being here, she said softly. I feel safer than I have in years. You make me feel safe. Good, Mikael said. He lifted his hand as if to touch her face, then seemed to catch himself, letting it fall back to his side. You should always feel safe, especially with me. They stood there for a moment, the air between them charged with something Eleanor was afraid to name. Then Mikael stepped back, returning to the vegetables, and the moment passed. But something had shifted between them, a recognition of feelings that went beyond simple gratitude and kindness. Summer deepened, and Eleanor bloomed in the mountain valley like a flower long denied sunlight. The bruises faded from her skin, the shadows from her eyes. She grew strong from the physical work and good food, her body filling out from its gauntness. More importantly, the constant tension she had carried for 2 years began to ease. She stopped flinching at sudden movements, stopped constantly monitoring her words and actions for potential offense. Mikael watched these changes with quiet satisfaction. He found himself looking forward to Eleanor's company, to the sound of her laughter, to the way she bit her lip in concentration when learning a new skill. More and more often, he caught himself watching her when she was unaware, admiring the grace of her movements, the intelligence in her eyes, the determination in the set of her jaw. He was falling in love with her, he realized one day as he watched her successfully catch a fish from the stream, her triumphant laugh ringing across the valley. The knowledge should have frightened him. He had lived alone for so long, had convinced himself he was better off without attachments. But instead of fear, he felt a fierce protectiveness and a desire to make her smile every day for the rest of their lives. But he said nothing. Eleanor was healing, learning to trust again. The last thing she needed was pressure from him, expectations of affection or intimacy. So Mikael kept his feelings to himself and focused on being her friend, her teacher, her protector. Eleanor, for her part, was aware of her growing feelings for Mikael, even if she tried to deny them. How could she not develop feelings for a man who treated her with such consistent gentleness and respect, who never demanded anything from her, who gave without expectation of return, who was strong enough to protect her, but secure enough to never need to prove it? She found herself noticing small things about him, the way his hair curled slightly at his nape, the rare but beautiful smile that transformed his serious face, the competence of his hands, whether building something or preparing food. She noticed how safe she felt sleeping in the cabin, knowing he was just outside on the porch, standing guard. She noticed how her heart lifted when he came back from a hunting trip, how empty the cabin felt in his absence. She was falling in love with him, and it terrified her. How could she trust these feelings? Thomas had seemed kind once before the wedding. What if she was making the same mistake again? What if Mikael's gentleness was just an act, to be dropped once he had her committed to him? But even as these doubts crossed her mind, Eleanor knew they were unfair. Mikael had had countless opportunities to hurt her, to take advantage of her vulnerability. He never had. More than that, he actively worked to ensure she could take care of herself, teaching her skills that would let her survive without him if necessary. That was not the behavior of a man seeking control. Late one night, Eleanor woke to the sound of voices outside the cabin, male voices, multiple men speaking in low tones. Fear shot through her like lightning. She crept to the window and peered out into the darkness illuminated by a waning moon. 4 men on horses had surrounded Mikael, who had been sleeping on the porch. He was on his feet now, rifle in hand, facing them calmly despite being outnumbered. Eleanor recognized none of them, which meant they were not from the original posse. These must be men Thomas had hired, bounty hunters or mercenaries. "We hear you got yourself a woman up here," one of the men said. Woman matching the description of Eleanor Hutchins from Silver Ridge. Her husband, he is real worried about her, offering $500 to anyone who brings her back safe. "I do not know this woman you speak of," Mikael said, his voice carrying clearly in the night air. "I live alone." "That so?" another man said skeptically. "Then you would not mind if we searched your cabin?" "I would mind very much," Mikael said, and there was steel in his tone now. "You are on my land without invitation. You have 1 minute to leave before I start shooting." "There is 4 of us and 1 of you," the first man said. "You are not in position to make threats." "I count 3 shots before you reach me," Mikael said calmly. "Maybe 4 if I am lucky. Question is, which 3 of you want to die for $500? There was a tense silence. The men shifted in their saddles, hands moving toward weapons. Eleanor knew she had to act. She grabbed Mikael's second rifle from where it hung on the wall, checked that it was loaded, and stepped out onto the porch. "He is not alone," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I count 6 shots between the 2 of us, more than enough for 4 men. Mikael's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, keeping his rifle trained on the men. Eleanor moved to stand beside him, her own weapon raised. The men reassessed the situation. 2 armed shooters in defensible positions versus 4 men on horseback in the open. The odds had shifted. "The woman does not even want to come with you," Mikael said. "Look at her. Does she seem like she need rescuing?" "Her husband says she is not in her right mind," one of the men argued, but his heart was clearly not in it. "Says she needs medical care." "Her husband is a liar," Eleanor said clearly. "I left because he beat me. I left because staying meant dying. I am not going back, and any man who tries to take me will have to kill me first. I will not be dragged back to that house alive." The conviction in her voice seemed to affect the men. They exchanged glances. Look, the first man said finally, we do not want trouble. We heard about a reward and thought it was worth checking out. But I got no taste for forcing a woman to go somewhere against her will, and I definitely got no taste for getting shot. You folks want to stay up here playing house, that is your business. Then ride out, Mikael said, and if you happen to talk to this husband, you tell him Eleanor Hutchins is dead. You searched and found nothing, understand? The men nodded. They turned their horses and rode back into the darkness, disappearing among the trees. Mikael and Eleanor stood silent, weapons raised until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. Then, and only then, did Mikael lower his rifle. You should have stayed inside, he said, but his voice was gentle, without reproach. I was not going to hide while you faced them alone, Eleanor replied. She was shaking now, adrenaline draining away to leave her weak need. We are in this together. Mikael took the rifle from her hands and set both weapons aside. Then, moving slowly to give her time to pull away, he put his arms around her. Eleanor stiffened for just a second before melting into his embrace, letting herself be held, letting the strength and warmth of him chase away the lingering fear. We are in this together, Mikael agreed softly, his voice rumbling in his chest where Eleanor's cheek rested. But that means you do not take foolish risks. If those men had started shooting, you could have been killed. So could you, Eleanor pointed out, her voice muffled against his shirt. Yes, Mikael acknowledged, but I have lived alone long time. I know what I risk when I choose to fight. You are just starting to live again. I do not want you to throw that away. Eleanor pulled back enough to look up at him. In the moonlight, his face was all plains and shadows, but his eyes were warm, concerned. My life would not be worth much if I saved it by letting you die protecting me, she said. You matter, Mikael. To me, you matter. Something flickered in Mikael's expression, something intense and yearning. His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing gently across her cheekbone. Eleanor, he said, and her name in his accented voice sounded like a prayer. Then his lips were on hers, gentle and questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Eleanor did not pull away. Instead, she pressed closer, her hands fisting in his shirt, kissing him back with 2 years of suppressed longing and need. This was nothing like Thomas's demanding, punishing kisses. This was warmth and sweetness and possibility. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Mikael rested his forehead against Eleanor's, his eyes closed. I have wanted to do that for weeks, he admitted, but I worry it is too soon, that you are not ready, that I am taking advantage. You are not, Eleanor assured him. I have wanted this too. I was just afraid to admit it, afraid to trust my own feelings. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. But I do trust you, Mikael. You have shown me what a good man truly is, not someone who pretends respectability while causing harm in private, but someone whose actions match his words, someone who is kind not for show, but because that is who he is. Mikael's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. He kissed her again, slower this time, savoring the moment. Then, with visible reluctance, he stepped back. We should get some rest, he said. Those men may have left, but they know where we are now. We need to be alert. He paused. Tomorrow I think we should talk about future, about what you want, what we both want, yes? Eleanor nodded, feeling lighter than she had in years. Yes, tomorrow we talk. She went back into the cabin, but sleep was a long time coming. She lay in the bed, touching her lips where Mikael had kissed her, marveling at the difference between fear and love, between cruelty masked as care and genuine tenderness. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Eleanor woke to find Mikael already up, preparing breakfast. When she emerged from the cabin, he smiled at her with such warmth that her heart skipped a beat. They ate together, speaking of small things, but the air between them hummed with awareness and unspoken possibility. After breakfast, Mikael took Eleanor's hand and led her to a spot by the stream where the morning light turned the water golden. They sat together on the grass, and Mikael was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. I want you to stay, he finally said. Not because you have no choice, not because you need protection, but because you want to. I want us to be together, Eleanor. But only if that is what you want too. I will never force you, never pressure you. If you want to leave, I will help you go somewhere safe. If you want to stay, but only as friends, I will respect that. What I feel for you, it is real. But your freedom matters more than my feelings." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, healing tears. "I want to stay," she said. "I want to be with you, Mikael. You make me feel things I thought I would never feel again. Hope, safety, joy." She squeezed his hand. "I love you. I think I have for a while now. I was just too scared to admit it." The smile that broke across Mikael's face was incandescent. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I love you too," he said fiercely. "I will spend every day proving you can trust that love. I will never hurt you, Eleanor. This I swear." "I know," Eleanor said, and realized she meant it completely. "I know." They sat by the stream for a long while, holding each other, making quiet plans for a future together. Eventually, they would need to discuss practicalities, whether Eleanor should change her appearance, whether they needed to move to an even more remote location, how to handle any future attempts by Thomas to find her. But for now, in this moment, they simply enjoyed being together, two wounded souls who had found healing and hope in each other. That afternoon, Mikael took Eleanor to a high meadow he had never shown her before, a place where wildflowers bloomed in riotous color and the view stretched for miles. There, with only the mountains as witnesses, he asked her to be his wife, not in any legal sense, not with documents that could be traced, but in the way that mattered most, a commitment of hearts. "I have nothing to offer you but this hard life," Mikael said, holding both her hands in his. "No fancy house, no society, no comforts of town. Just me, this valley, and whatever we build together. But I promise you respect, partnership, love. I promise you will always have voice, always have choice. I promise to honor you, protect you, and stand beside you as equal. This is my vow, Eleanor Brennan. Will you accept it?" Eleanor felt joy bubbling up inside her like a spring. "I accept," she said, "and I give you my own vow, Mikael Petersen. I promise to stand with you, to build this life together, to trust you and respect you. I promise to be your partner in all things, to share your burdens and your joys. This is my vow. Will you accept it?" "I accept," Mikael said, and they sealed their promises with a kiss that tasted of wildflowers and forever. They married themselves there in the meadow, with no preacher or witnesses but the mountains and sky. And it felt more real, more sacred than any ceremony in Silver Ridge's church had ever felt. This was a union of choice and love, not obligation and societal expectation. That night, for the first time, Eleanor stayed in Mikael's arms rather than sleeping alone in the cabin. He was gentle beyond words, patient with her nervousness, attentive to every signal she gave. Where Thomas had taken without regard for her comfort or consent, Mikael gave freely and asked permission at every step. The difference was profound, transformative. Eleanor discovered that intimacy could be beautiful rather than frightening, that her body could be a source of pleasure rather than pain. Afterward, as they lay tangled together beneath the firs, Mikael stroked her hair gently. "You are sure about this life?" he asked quietly. "It will not be easy. Winters are harsh. We will be isolated for months at a time. You will be cut off from everything you knew before." "Everything I knew before was a prison," Eleanor said firmly. "This is freedom. You are freedom. I have never been more sure of anything." Mikael kissed her forehead. "Then we build good life together. I teach you everything I know. We make this valley into true home. We will be happy here, I think." "I think so too," Eleanor agreed, and nestled closer into his warmth, finally, truly at peace. The rest of the summer passed in golden contentment. Eleanor learned to shoot accurately, to track game, to read the forest signs that told stories of animal movement and weather changes. She worked alongside Mikael to expand the garden, to lay in supplies for winter, to prepare the cabin for the cold months ahead. They worked together, laughed together, loved together, building a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine affection. In early September, Henry Blackwood returned with news. "Thought you should know," he said as they shared coffee on the cabin porch. "Thomas Hutchins has remarried, found himself a new wife just 3 months after declaring his first one dead. Girl of 17, an orphan with no family to protect her. Town gossips are saying it is unseemly how quick he moved on, but most folks figure a successful merchant needs a wife to manage his household. Eleanor felt a chill run through her, thinking of that poor girl walking into the trap she had escaped. "We have to warn her," she said immediately. "How?" Mikael asked gently. "If you send warning, you reveal you are alive. Thomas will not stop searching until he finds you. And even if we warn her, will she believe it? Or will Thomas convince her you are crazy, jealous, vindictive?" Eleanor knew he was right, but it aided her. Henry watched her sympathetically. "I know it is hard," he said, "but you cannot save everyone, girl. You saved yourself. That is what matters. Maybe this new wife will be smarter, or stronger, or luckier. Maybe she will have people to protect her in ways you did not. You cannot know. All you can do is live your own life and hope for the best." It was cold comfort, but it was the only comfort available. Eleanor tried to put it out of her mind, though sometimes late at night she would lie awake thinking of the new Mrs. Hutchins, hoping the girl would fare better than she had. Winter came to the high country in late October, and with it, a beauty and harshness Eleanor had never experienced. The first major snowstorm dumped 3 feet of snow on the valley, effectively cutting them off from the outside world. Mikael had prepared well, and they had plenty of food and firewood, but Eleanor quickly learned what true isolation meant. At first, the enforced closeness worried her. What if being trapped together for months revealed incompatibilities, caused conflicts? What if Mikael grew tired of her constant presence, but those fears proved groundless? If anything, winter drew them closer. They developed easy routines, sharing chores and responsibilities. Mikael taught Eleanor to read and write better, as her education had been limited. She taught him songs her mother had sung when Eleanor was a child. They played checkers with pieces Mikael carved from wood, told stories, made love by firelight, and simply enjoyed each other's company. "You are not bored?" Eleanor asked one evening in January as a blizzard howled outside, making the cabin feel even more cozy and protected by contrast. Mikael looked up from the harness he was mending and smiled. "Bored? No. Content, yes. Happy, yes. This is best winter I ever have. Usually I count days until spring, but this year I do not mind winter so much. Good company makes all difference." Eleanor moved to sit beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. "I feel the same way. I thought I would hate being trapped inside, but I do not. As long as you are here, I am happy." "We are lucky people," Mikael said, setting aside his work to put his arm around her. "Not many find this kind of happiness. We should not take it for granted." "I do not," Eleanor assured him. "Every day I wake up grateful. Grateful I ran. Grateful you found me. Grateful for every moment of this life we are building." In February, Eleanor realized her monthly courses were late. At first, she thought it was simply stress or the change in her lifestyle. But as weeks passed and other signs appeared, the truth became undeniable. She was pregnant. She told Mikael one evening after supper, nervous about his reaction. Would he be happy, worried, regretful? But when she spoke the words, Mikael's face transformed with joy so pure and complete that Eleanor's fears evaporated instantly. A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have baby." He dropped to his knees before her, pressing his face against her still flat stomach. "This is best news, Eleanor. Best possible news." "You are not worried?" Eleanor asked. "About bringing a child into this hard life, so far from doctors and help?" "I'm little worried," Mikael admitted, looking up at her. "Childbirth is dangerous, but women have been having babies in wilderness forever. My mother had me in cabin, much like this one, with only midwife to help. We will manage. And I am so happy, Eleanor. A child with you. It is more than I ever dreamed possible." Eleanor felt tears of relief and joy slip down her cheeks. "I am happy too. I did not know if I wanted children after everything with Thomas, but this, a baby with you, our baby, I want this so much." Mikael stood and pulled her into a gentle embrace, careful of her middle even though she was barely showing. "We will be good parents," he said firmly. "We will show our child what real love looks like. Not control or cruelty, but respect and care and safety. This I promise." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the remainder of winter and into spring. As the snow melted and the valley turned green again, Eleanor bloomed with new life. She felt stronger and healthier than ever before, as if creating life had given her purpose beyond merely surviving. Mikael was attentive without being overbearing, helping with heavy tasks but never treating her as fragile or incapable. In early May, Henry Blackwood arrived with his spring trading visit and brought unexpected news. "Thomas Hutchins is dead," he announced without preamble. Eleanor felt the world tilt sideways. "What?" "Happened about a month ago," Henry said. "Story goes that his new wife, Sarah, turned out to be tougher than she looked. He tried his usual tricks, beating her in private while playing the good husband in public. But Sarah had 3 older brothers who loved her fierce. When they saw Bruises, they confronted Thomas. He tried to lie his way out of it, but Sarah told them everything. How he hurt her, how he threatened to have her committed if she told anyone, how he controlled every aspect of her life." Henry paused to accept the coffee Eleanor poured with shaking hands. "Those brothers, they did not take it well. There was a confrontation. Thomas pulled a gun. One of the brothers shot him in self-defense. Whole town saw it happen, right in the middle of Silver Ridge's main street. Thomas died on the spot." Eleanor sat down heavily, one hand on her swollen belly. "He is really dead?" "Really dead," Henry confirmed. "And here is the interesting part. After Thomas died, Sarah started talking, told everyone who would listen about the abuse. Other women started coming forward, women Thomas had courted before marrying you. Turns out he had a pattern. He always chose women who were isolated, vulnerable. One woman said he had courted her, but she refused him because something felt wrong. Another said he had hired her as a clerk in his store and made unwanted advances. She quit." Henry looked at Eleanor with sympathy. "Sarah said she wished she had known about you, that if there had been any warning, she might have avoided marrying him. She said she understands now why you ran, and she does not blame you. A lot of folks in Silver Ridge are reassessing Thomas Hutchins' reputation, realizing the good, honest man was a lie." Eleanor did not know what to feel. Relief that Thomas could never hurt anyone again. Grief for the years she lost to fear of him. Anger that it took another woman's suffering and her brother's violence to expose the truth. In the end, she felt mostly numb. Mikael put his hand over hers. "You are free now," he said gently. "Truly free. You do not have to be dead anymore. You can be Eleanor Brennan or Eleanor Petersen or whoever you want to be." "I want to be Eleanor Petersen," she said slowly, testing how it felt to say the name aloud. "I want to be your wife, the mother of our child, a woman who lives free in these mountains. That is who I want to be." "Then that is who you are," Mikael said, and kissed her gently. Henry stayed for 2 days, trading furs and news. Before he left, he gave Eleanor a letter. "Sarah Hutchins wrote this for you. She asked me to deliver it if I ever saw you. She does not know for certain you are alive, but she hoped." After Henry departed, Eleanor opened the letter with trembling hands. The handwriting was careful and neat, the words simple but heartfelt. "To Eleanor Hutchins, wherever you are, I hope you survived. I hope you found freedom and happiness far from that terrible man. I am sorry I could not save myself sooner, sorry that my situation led to violence. But I am not sorry Thomas is dead. The world is better without him in it. If you are alive, please know that you are not crazy, not hysterical, not any of the things he said you were. You were a woman trying to survive. I understand that now. I hope you have found peace. Yours, Sarah." Eleanor folded the letter carefully and tucked it away in her trunk of precious things. Then she went outside to where Mikael was splitting wood and wrapped her arms around him from behind, careful of her pregnant belly. "I am glad he is dead," she said quietly. "Does that make me a terrible person?" "No," Mikael said, setting down the axe and turning to hold her. "It makes you human. He hurt you terribly. You are allowed to be glad the threat of him is gone." "I am glad Sarah survived. I am glad she had people to protect her." "Me too," Mikael agreed. "And now we focus on our own life, our own future. We let the past stay buried where it belongs." Eleanor nodded against his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him, pine and wood smoke and clean sweat. Our future, she repeated. I like the sound of that. Their daughter was born in early August during a thunderstorm that rattled the cabin windows and made the mountain valley feel alive with electricity. Mikael acted as midwife, having helped with animal births and even assisted when his youngest sister was born. He was calm and steady throughout Eleanor's labor, supporting her, encouraging her, never once showing the fear she knew he must have felt. When the baby finally emerged, red-faced and wailing with indignation, Mikael placed her on Eleanor's chest with hands that trembled slightly. "A girl," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "A beautiful, healthy girl." Eleanor looked down at her daughter, at the tiny, perfect face and small, flailing fists, and felt love so intense it was almost painful. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." They named her Ingrid, after Mikael's mother. She was a healthy, vigorous baby with her father's dark hair and her mother's gray eyes. Mikael proved to be a devoted father, taking to parenthood with the same patient competence he brought to everything else. He would walk the cabin floor for hours with Ingrid when she was fussy, singing Norwegian lullabies in his deep, rumbling voice. He carved toys for her, built a cradle that rocked gently, baby-proofed the cabin with the thoroughness of someone who understood mountain dangers. Eleanor, watching him with their daughter, fell even more deeply in love with him. This was the father she had dreamed of for her children, patient, gentle, present, a man who saw parenting as partnership, not as the mother's sole responsibility. He changed diapers without complaint, took night feedings when he could, and never once suggested that childcare was beneath him or solely Eleanor's domain. As Ingrid grew from infant to toddler, the valley became her playground. She learned to walk on mountain trails, to recognize animal tracks, to identify edible plants. By the time she was 3, she could speak both English and Norwegian, switching between them with the ease of young children. She was fearless and curious, exploring everything, and both parents had to remain constantly alert to keep her from the various dangers of mountain life. 2 years after Ingrid's birth, Eleanor gave birth to a son they named Anders. He was quieter than his sister had been, more contemplative, but no less loved. With 2 children, the cabin felt truly like a home, full of noise and laughter and life. Henry Blackwood and his partners became regular visitors, arriving twice a year with supplies and news from the outside world. Through them, Eleanor learned that Silver Ridge had largely forgotten about her. Those who remembered the story assumed she had died in the wilderness. Thomas's reputation had been posthumously destroyed, and the general store was now run by a cooperative of townspeople. Sarah had remarried, this time to a gentle farmer who treated her well. The years flowed past like water in the mountain stream, steady, constant, sometimes rough, but always moving forward. Eleanor and Mikael built a life of remarkable richness despite their isolation. They expanded the cabin, adding a second room for the children. They improved the garden, cultivated fruit trees, raised chickens and goats. They created a tiny, thriving homestead in their mountain valley. The children grew strong and capable, learning from both parents. Ingrid became an excellent shot and tracker like her father, while Anders showed a gift for growing things and animal husbandry. Both children were taught to read and write, to calculate numbers, to think critically. But more than skills, they learned love. They grew up seeing their parents treat each other with respect and affection, never witnessing violence or cruelty. They learned that strength could be gentle, that power could be wielded with care, that love was shown through actions, not just words. When Ingrid was 7 and Anders was 5, a new family moved into a valley about 10 miles away. They were homesteaders from Sweden, a young couple with a baby, seeking the same isolation and freedom that Mikael and Eleanor had found. The 2 families became friends, visiting back and forth, sharing resources and knowledge. The children had playmates, and Eleanor had another woman to talk to, someone who understood the challenges and rewards of mountain life. More families came over the years, drawn by tales of good land and freedom. A small community developed, scattered across the high valleys, independent but interconnected. They helped each other through hard times, celebrated together during good times, and looked out for one another's welfare. It was not a formal town with laws and authorities, but a loose collective based on mutual aid and respect. Eleanor found herself becoming something of a leader in this community. Other women sought her advice, admired her strength and competence. She taught several younger women to shoot, to set traps, to defend themselves. She never spoke directly about Thomas or her past, but other women seemed to sense that she understood escape, understood survival. Several times, women fleeing bad situations found their way to the high valleys, and Eleanor always made sure they had shelter, support, and protection. Mikael watched his wife blossom into this role with pride. The frightened, broken woman he had found 7 years ago had transformed into someone powerful and confident, someone who used her own suffering to help others. She was beautiful in her strength, and he never tired of telling her so. On their 10th anniversary of that day in the meadow when they married themselves, Mikael took Eleanor back to that same spot. The children were being watched by their Swedish neighbors for the day, giving the couple rare time alone together. 10 years, Mikael said, holding Eleanor's hands just as he had on that long-ago day. Best 10 years of my life. You have given me so much, Eleanor. Love, children, purpose, happiness. I cannot imagine life without you. You saved me, Eleanor replied, her eyes bright with tears of joy. You gave me back my life, my freedom, myself. Everything good I have now exists because you saw past what that posse said, saw the truth of my situation, and chose to help. I love you more now than I did 10 years ago, and I will love you even more 10 years from now. They renewed their vows there among the wildflowers, promising again to love and honor and stand together through whatever came. Then, they spent the afternoon, as they had not been able to in years, simply enjoying each other's company without the demands of children or work. They talked and laughed and made love in the soft grass, feeling young and carefree despite the years that had passed. As the sun began to set, painting the peaks in familiar shades of gold and rose, they walked back to the cabin hand in hand. Their children came running to greet them, Ingrid chattering about her day, and Anders shyly presenting a bouquet of wildflowers he had picked for his mother. Inside the cabin, the fire had been laid and dinner prepared by their thoughtful neighbors. That evening, with the children finally asleep and the cabin peaceful, Eleanor and Mikael sat together on the porch as they had so many nights before. The valley spread before them in the twilight, beautiful and wild in theirs. Do you ever regret it? Mikael asked quietly. This life? The isolation, the hardship? Do you ever wish you had gone to a city, found an easier way? Eleanor considered the question seriously, as she always did with Mikael's inquiries. No, she said finally. This life is hard sometimes, yes, but it is honest. It is free. It is mine. I chose it, and I continue to choose it every day. That choice, that freedom to choose, is worth any hardship. She leaned against his shoulder. And I have you. I have our children. I have purpose and respect and safety. What more could I want? Nothing, Mikael agreed, pulling her closer. We have everything that matters. They sat in comfortable silence as stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built something beautiful from shared trauma and mutual healing. They had carved out a life of love and partnership in the wilderness, proving that even the deepest wounds could heal given time, care, and safety. Years continued to pass. Ingrid grew into a young woman as strong and capable as her mother, eventually marrying a trapper's son and settling in a neighboring valley. Anders took over more and more of the homestead work, showing the same steady competence his father possessed. Eleanor and Mikael grew older together, their hair turning gray, their bodies moving more slowly, but their love remaining constant and deep. When Eleanor was 40, she and Mikael made their first visit to a proper town in over 15 years. They needed supplies that could not be obtained through trading, and more importantly, they wanted to legally record their marriage and their children's births. With Thomas dead for many years and Eleanor's story largely forgotten, it seemed safe. The town clerk who recorded their information was a young man who had never heard of Eleanor Hutchins. He took down their details without question, officially recognizing a marriage that had existed in every meaningful way for over 15 years. Walking out of that office with legal papers in hand, Eleanor felt another weight lift that she had not fully realized she carried. Now it is real in eyes of law, Mikael said, examining the marriage certificate. It was always real, Eleanor corrected gently. But yes, I'm glad to have the paper. For the children, so their inheritance is protected. For us, so no one can question our union. They spent 2 days in town, long enough to conduct their business, but not so long that the noise and crowds became overwhelming. Eleanor found herself relieved to return to the mountains, to the quiet and space she had grown to love. Town life held no appeal anymore. Her home was in the high country, with Mikael and the life they had built. As they rode back up into the mountains, following familiar trails, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought about the terrified woman who had fled Silver Ridge 20 years ago, convinced she had only 2 choices: death by Thomas's hands or death in the wilderness. She had never imagined a third option, could never have dreamed that running toward probable death would actually lead her to life. She thought about the moment Mikael had first spoken to her outside that cave, how close she had come to refusing his help. If she had stayed silent, if she had let fear and distrust win, where would she be now? Dead in those mountains most likely, her bones scattered by scavengers. Instead, she was alive and healthy, mother to 2 thriving children, wife to a good man, respected member of a small but strong community. "What are you thinking?" Mikael asked, noticing her reflective silence. "That I am grateful," Eleanor said simply. "Grateful for every choice that led me to you, to this life. Even the painful ones, because they made this moment possible." "I am grateful too," Mikael said, "for the chance to love you, to build life with you. You make me a better man than I would be alone." They arrived back at the cabin to find Anders had managed everything perfectly in their absence. He had a meal ready, the animals cared for, firewood stocked. At 18, he was fully capable of running the homestead himself, though he showed no inclination to leave. He liked the quiet mountain life, felt no pull toward towns or cities or other adventures. That evening, the 3 of them sat together, while Anders talked about his plans to expand the goat herd and perhaps try raising sheep. Eleanor listened with half her attention, the other half occupied with simple contentment at being home, being safe, being surrounded by people she loved and who loved her in return. Later, lying in bed with Mikael's arms around her, Eleanor thought about that posse that had hunted her so long ago. Those men who had believed they were doing good, rescuing a troubled woman from her own poor judgment. They had never seen the bruises hidden beneath her clothes, had never questioned Thomas's carefully constructed lies. In their minds, she was certain they had been heroes trying to save a hysterical woman from herself. But Mikael had seen the truth immediately. He had looked past reputation and respectability to the reality of her situation. He had believed her without requiring proof or explanation. That belief, offered so freely when no one else would, had been the first step toward healing. "I love you," Eleanor whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Mikael replied, his voice rough with sleep. "Always will, until last breath and beyond." Eleanor smiled and let sleep claim her, secure in the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged, with exactly who she was meant to be with. The frightened runaway wife was gone, transformed into someone strong and free. Eleanor Petersen, mountain woman, beloved wife, devoted mother, survivor. The story could have ended in tragedy, as so many stories of abused women did. But instead, through a combination of courage, luck, and one good man's decision to look beyond lies and see truth, it became a story of hope. Not every woman could escape as Eleanor had. Not every woman found a Mikael. But Eleanor carried the knowledge that she had survived, had thrived, and that knowledge gave her strength to help others find their own paths to freedom. In the high valleys of Colorado Territory, in a cabin surrounded by mountains that kept their secrets, Eleanor and Mikael Petersen lived out their days in peace and love. They grew old together, watched their grandchildren play in the meadow where they had wed, passed on their knowledge and skills to the next generation. They never forgot the darkness that had brought them together, but they chose to focus on the light they had created from it. And when, many years later, Eleanor took her last breath with Mikael's hand in hers and her children by her side, she went peacefully, a woman who had lived fully and loved deeply, who had transformed suffering into strength and fear into freedom. She had run away from a good, honest husband, as the posse had shouted, and in running, she had found something far more precious, a good, honest life, built on a foundation of respect, equality, and genuine love. Mikael followed her 5 years later, having lived long enough to see great-grandchildren born, to know that the legacy he and Eleanor built would continue. His last words were of her, speaking her name with the same love and reverence he had always shown. They were buried together in a high meadow full of wildflowers, two souls who had found each other against all odds and created something beautiful together. Their children and grandchildren continued to tell their story, though softened and simplified over the generations. It became a family legend, how great-grandmother Eleanor had fled a terrible situation and great-grandfather Mikael had saved her, how they built a life together in the wilderness, how their love was the foundation on which the entire family was built. The details of abuse and violence faded, considered too harsh for young ears, but the essential truth remained. Eleanor had been brave enough to run toward freedom, and Mikael had been good enough to help her find it. The cabin still stood decades later, maintained by descendants who valued the history it represented. The valley remained beautiful and wild, a testament to the life Eleanor and Mikael had chosen. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light turned gold on the mountain peaks, people swore they could feel the presence of those two souls who had loved this place so well, still watching over the home they had created together. In the end, Eleanor's story was not one of victimhood, but of survival and triumph. She had refused to accept the life others tried to force upon her. She had risked everything for freedom and found not just liberty, but love, not just survival, but joy. She had proven that the posse was wrong, that running away had been the sanest, strongest thing she could have done. And in Mikael, she had found a partner who understood that a woman's freedom was not something to be controlled, but something to be protected and celebrated. Their love story was not conventional by the standards of their time. There had been no formal courtship, no family approval, no church blessing initially. But it was real and deep and lasting in ways that mattered far more than convention. It was built on mutual respect, on seeing and valuing each other as whole people, on choosing each other freely every single day. That choice, that freedom, was what made their love revolutionary and powerful. And so the story of Eleanor and Mikael became part of the mountain lore, a reminder that sometimes running away is the bravest thing a person can do, that salvation can come from unexpected places, and that real love looks like freedom, respect, and partnership. It became a story told to young women facing impossible choices, a reminder that there is always another option, always hope, always the possibility of a better life somewhere beyond the immediate darkness. The mountains kept their secrets and sheltered their stories, as mountains always do. And in those high, wild places where civilization's rules held less sway, where strength and competence mattered more than respectability and reputation, people like Eleanor and Mikael could build lives true to themselves, free from the constraints and cruelties of the world below. They could heal, grow, love, and thrive, creating their own version of happiness in the spaces between what was expected and what was possible. That was the true gift Mikael gave Eleanor. Not just rescue, but the space and support to become who she was always meant to be. And the true gift Eleanor gave Mikael, not just companionship, but proof that his choice to help, to care, to love had mattered profoundly. Together, they proved that even the deepest wounds could heal, that broken things could be made whole, and that love, when given freely and received with trust, could transform everything. Their story ended not with tragedy or loss, but with fulfillment and peace, two lives well lived and a legacy of love that continued through generations. It was the happy ending Eleanor never thought possible when she fled Silver Ridge, the reward for her courage and Mikael's kindness, and it served as a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever felt trapped, showing that freedom was possible, that love could be gentle and respectful, and that sometimes the wilderness held more safety than civilization ever could. In the end, Eleanor Petersen died as she had lived her last years, free, loved, and surrounded by the beauty of the mountains she had made her home. And that was the greatest triumph of all.